right, good afternoon, everyone. It is time for us to go ahead and get started. I know our time is very brief today, so I wanted to go ahead and jump right in. So I just want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know we're all getting ready for the students to arrive in this building, whether it's next week or the week after. So definitely want to make use of this time. So this is our summer blitz. This session is Intro to Disciplinary Literacy for Secondary Educators. My name is Cherron Ramsey. I am a math consultant here at MAISA. I'm also the co-chair for the Disciplinary Literacy Task Force for the state. I have my colleague here, Dr. Christy Hamby. She'll just be kind of managing the chat for me and helping out within the session. So we are definitely happy to be here with you all today. So again, the focus for today is really thinking about disciplinary literacy. So we'll take a moment to look over think about what it is. What is literacy and what is disciplinary literacy? We'll take a moment to look at the instructional practices document that has been released by the GELN task force that really kind of focuses on that adolescent literacy. The practices are designed for a secondary classroom, so we'll kind of focus on that. All right, so when you think about literacy, again, how would you define literacy? And you can put that in the chat, you can unmute. This is a very informal session, so I would love to hear your voices. How would you define literacy? Effectively being able to communicate through reading and writing. Thank you, Stephanie. The ability to read, write, and articulate information. Yes, Lindsay, thank you so much. Yes, so when we think about literacy, ability to communicate through all media. Yes, these are all great. And we think about it, it's complicated. It's not just one definition when we think about literacy. We also have to think about what text is. I heard someone mention media. What is text when we talk about literacy, and thinking about how we expand our ideas of what we're calling text. There's different types of literacy: functional literacy, critical literacy, literacy through technology, and thinking about what it means to be literate, that consuming information, constructing meaning, and communicating. So I found this little word cloud that has literacy on here, and it has a lot of different words on here. Are there any words that kind of stand out to you or surprise you, or that you kind of agree with, or it kind of like resonates with you? Any words that you see on this word cloud when you think about literacy? Access is definitely something that stands out to me. Cultural. Any other words that kind of stick out? Critical, absolutely, yes. Family, yep. So as we think about literacy, we want to focus on today disciplinary literacy. So this is the definition that we're using for disciplinary literacy right now. I'll give you a moment to read it. I'll read it out loud, and you can read it to yourself. Disciplinary literacy refers to the specifics of reading, writing, and communicating in a discipline. It focuses on the ways of thinking, the skills, and the tools that are used by experts in the disciplines. Each discipline has a specialized vocabulary and components that are unique to that discipline. So when we're thinking about disciplinary literacy, we go beyond just those ideas of, how do students read, how do students write, right? We're really thinking about what does it mean in my field of mathematics. And I am a mathematics consultant, so a lot of what you will hear from me today is going to be through that mathematics lens. But think about, what does it mean for science? What does it mean to be what does disciplinary literacy mean for history? So really think about those specialized things. What are things that are really authentic to helping students read, write, and communicate in the specific discipline, right? So one of the things when we think about adolescent literacy that we just kind of want to acknowledge. Now this actually came from Dr. Elizabeth Emoji Dr. Elizabeth Moji from University of Michigan. She's one of the researchers behind our essential practices, her as well as Dr. Darren Stockdale from University of Michigan as well. So this particular image is something that she created to kind of think about adolescent literacy. And as students kind of go through school at the young age, that language Like in elementary school, they're very excited about reading. They want to read, they want to write, they're learning how to do that. But as they get older and get into the middle school and high school, that excitement of reading isn't always there. When they get to high school or middle school, the subject matter demands start to increase, though they get more technical in regards to those content areas. So that's getting more difficult, and then youth interest in those subject matters start to decrease, right? So how do we provide opportunities for students to increase their interest and also continue to develop those skills? And one way to really think about that is focusing on disciplinary literacy practices that really include students' interest in every content area. How are we really providing spaces for them to read, write, and communicate in any content area, and in authentic ways that are natural, ways that make sense for the students? I'm going to pause right there to see if there are any questions, comments before I move on. All right, so we're going to keep moving. So again, disciplinary literacy is not a new name for content area literacy. We're not really thinking about, we're going to do the drop everything and read type of style. We're not talking about that. We're really thinking about content plus process, right? So again, those discrete topics in a discipline, what the students think about, and then that process is of how they think about it. So again, with that content area literacy, we're really focusing on those general reading strategies, how they make inferences, how they're summarizing, how they're asking questions. But disciplinary literacy really focuses on acknowledging how one thinks about the content that's specific to that discipline. Are there any questions or comments about thinking about the difference between content area literacy and disciplinary literacy? Anything you notice or anything that resonates with you? And you can unmute, you can add to the chat. Before I really get into the instructional essential practices, there's just a suite of documents that have been created through the state level task forces that range from pre-K and now with the disciplinary literacy practices all the way to 12th grade. The 6 through 12 really focuses on disciplinary literacy, but there are actual literacy practices for pre-K and up. So this is a continuum of documents and a continuum of learning that the state task forces have come up with to really support literacy within our state. So I just kind of wanted to reference that. Again, the 612 document, these are the lead researchers for that, Dr. Elizabeth Moji and Dr. Darren Stockdale. So you'll see a lot of their names behind the work. But before we actually look at the document and actually dig into it, I want to kind of go over what they are and what they are not, because definitely want to be very clear about the purpose of these documents, or this document particularly. So what they are not, they're not something that we do with every child every day. We're really thinking about this for every child as we look at a unit of instruction. So within that unit of instruction, these practices should be happening, but we don't have to think so specifically like all 10 of these need to be happening every day for every particular child. It's not to be looked at as a checklist. It's not an evaluation tool. It's not in competition with any with the learning of the content. And really, when we're really doing mathematics teaching well or history teaching well, a lot of these things are happening, but the thing we need to focus on is being more intentional about how they're happening, how we facilitate these things, and what they are a resource for guiding professional learning, growing discipline through literacy, through the contents. They are authentic, they're flexible, they're resource agnostic. It's not really focused on a particular style. And it's discipline specific practices that help students read, write, and think in expert ways, because that's what we want for our students. We want our students to walk away from our classes and from our K-12 education system, really thinking, being critical thinkers and understanding how to read and write and critically think and communicate across the board. So before I actually look at the document, I kind of want to give you a little bit of structure around the document. So the document does have 10 practices. It starts off with 10 generic practices that kind of really outlines what those practices are in a generic way. And that is followed by the 10 practices that are specific to the content areas of mathematics, science, literacy, and history, social studies. The 10 practices are the same for all of those content areas. However, as you look in the content areas, they get specific to those particular content areas. So, for example, we're going to take a moment and look at practice number 1 and you can look at whatever, if you're an ELA person, feel free to look at the ELA or look at the science, look at the social studies. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to kind of to just peruse through the document. We're going to put, Christy just put that in the chat for you, but I want you to really look at practice number 1 and think about, you know, what resonates with you and what things you might want to explore further. So I'm going to stop sharing right now for the moment. And please let me know if you have any questions. Like I said, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to kind of peruse through that document. There is a purpose statement in there if you want to look at that purpose statement. And then you can look at whichever content area you would like to look at. And we're just looking at practice 1 at the moment. All right, it has been about 5 minutes. So hopefully you had a chance to go through practice number 1. We're going to spend some time in a breakout room just to kind of talk about what resonates with you, what things might you want to explore further. Practice 1 really is like the foundation of the work of the disciplinary literacy practices, because it really focuses on, for mathematics, problem-based instruction. That's how we kind of consider, that's what we kind of think about for problem-based instruction. For science, it would be phenomenon-based, or social studies, inquiry-based. So all these, how are we framing problems in order for students to really engage in reading, writing, and communicating within our practices? Would someone mind just sharing with us maybe some points that came out in your discussion about practice 1? Anyone mind sharing?
Well, we were talking a little bit. I had asked our group if they had resources or practical examples of project-based learning. I teach GED, so I teach science, social studies, math, and language arts. And quite often I try to use some sort of a little tiny project for social studies to get students hopefully interested in researching something. I use a prompt and I have them create questions that they want to have the answers to, and then go off and find the answers to them. So it might be about the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or whatever it might be. I wonder if others might have any resources or practical lessons or that they can share.
Oh, yeah. Anyone in here can speak to that. And also, before you leave, I'll give you the link to the Disciplinary Literacy website. It has a resource hub on there. And in the resource hub, there's like specific resources for each practice.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, well, like Cherron and I are math consultants, so I can only speak to the mathematics, but I have a link to a slide that I'm going to drop in the chat that we use for a lot of the more innovative lessons when we step outside of the curricular resource. So I can put that in the chat as well.
Thank you, Christy. What were some of those points that kind of stood out to you as you kind of perused the first practice? I know for specifically, and again, I'm focused on the mathematics, really thinking about those real world scenarios and really thinking about how students see mathematics in their everyday life. You know, how are we being intentional as teachers about providing opportunities for students to engage in problems that really connect to who they are. Again, that increases their engagement, right? Offering students to regular opportunities for students to collaborate with peers as a community of problem solvers through reading, writing, and communicating around mathematics. So again, positioning them as problem solvers, they're doing the work, they're doing the heavy lifting. As a teacher, thinking about finding those resources that position them to do that. Nancy stated, let me make sure I get this in the chat. Nancy stated, have students create their own word problems for the class to solve. Again, you're bringing in that student voice. You're giving them the opportunity to create something that makes sense to them and present it to the class. So yes, I love that idea. What are some other things that you can kind of think about, or anything else that kind of pops out from practice number 1? I also like the one that says create opportunities for students to enact literate mathematics identities and draw from both within and outside of school literacy practices, right? One of the things we do want to focus on is how do we develop students' mathematical identities? And part of that is their literate mathematics identities. Part of that is, do they feel like they can read, write, and communicate within mathematics? Do they feel like they're capable? And how do we as educators nurture that and support that and provide opportunities for them to build that? So really thinking about practice number 1, like I said, being really the foundation, like making sure that we're putting the right problem or the right situation in front of our students that allows for them to see themselves in what they're doing. It provides them opportunities to really think, collaborate, get to talking about whatever the subject area might be, but it's really important to be intentional about the type of in front of students. And it doesn't always have to be a huge project, right? Even with mathematics, we can look at one problem from the textbook, right? And it's really how we enact that particular problem. You know, what opportunities are we including in there for students to really engage into those things? So thank you for contributing to that conversation. We are going to briefly look at the remaining practices. Like we said, we just looked at practice number 1, and then we'll have some conversation about how this might be useful in the classroom setting or in the school setting. Let me share my screen. All right, so we already talked about practice number 1 and really facilitating inquiry-based learning. And like I said, that could be whatever content area. I know they're called different things. So social studies might call it inquiry, math might call it problem-based, science might call it phenomenon instruction, but we're really thinking about that critical thinking piece and how are we putting things in front of students where that's really going to cause them to think and collaborate and provide space for them to do these other things. So being intentional about, again, what we put in front of our students. Number 2, engage students in a wide range of text. Now, text is something that we definitely want to expand what we think about when we say text. Text is not just our articles and our books and things that we technically read, like a newspaper or something like that. Really thinking about text can be a video, text can be an equation, text can be anything that students really have to think about analyzing, right? So we can think about text are things that students even create. Students create their own text. I know sometimes we do in mathematics, they call it like the my favorite no or something like that, where students they might show their work and then the teacher might take their names off and look at that and they have a discussion about, you know, what the student did in that particular problem. That's using a student created text to have some critical conversations about that. So there's a lot of different ways that we can, you know, think about text and how we can use text within the classroom. Teaching students to read in the discipline. There are definitely things that are specific to science, specific to mathematics, specific to social studies that students have to be able to read and decipher. Again, we're thinking about that text. It could just be a graph. Students need to know how to read a graph. There's certain specific things that students have to understand. And that's something that's specific to, you know, mathematics or science or whatever the situation may be. But there's reading that's involved when they're looking at different things. So how are we providing opportunities for students to really dig into those things and not really always looking at the product, but also focusing in on that process of getting to where we want students to be. So 4, teach students to write in the discipline. Again, providing opportunities for students to write. 5, teach students to discuss and question complex texts. How are we thinking about those opportunities for students to engage in those things? 6, designing opportunities for speaking and listening. very important, when we think about who's learning, is the person that's doing the talking. So providing students opportunities to talk, even if it's that first draft thinking. Even in mathematics, there's revision that has to happen when they're doing their learning. So how often are we providing them opportunities to speak, and as well as listen for understanding to each other, as well as to the instructor. 7, building vocabulary and conceptual knowledge. There's so many different things and different ways that we look at vocabulary throughout the content area. So really thinking about what specific things are really authentic to your particular area. Ongoing assessment of students' language and literacy development. Again, assessment, when we think about assessment, formative and summative assessment, I'm really thinking about those formative assessments that we're doing across the content. Again, that I keep saying the word intentional because that's so important, that we're really being intentional about how we're really supporting how students talk and engage. Yes, when they're explaining and they're learning different things, I think it's really important to let students explain things in a way that makes sense to them. But as they grapple with those things and they learn more about what they are, building in that vocabulary, and so that they are developing that language that's specific to that content area. But it's also important to acknowledge how they speak and how they're connecting with that, and then we build onto that. 9, facilitate community networking to support developing students' identities and education. Again, really thinking about that interest level. We saw in that graph how, especially when students get into those secondary spaces, that interest level starts to decline. So one way to really think about how we increase that engagement piece and that interest level is thinking about how can we bring in things that make sense to them, things that are important to them, things that are within the communities. Are we bringing in, so math or whatever the instruction isn't just the textbook, it's really their environment. How can they use what they're learning to make a difference in their communities? How are we bringing those things into the classroom so it supports or it resonates with who they are, their personal identities? And number 10, teaching metadiscursive awareness, really talking about talking. What are those connections that I have within science and with mathematics? There might be certain words that in science might mean one thing, in mathematics might mean something different, or they might mean the same thing, and building those connections on how we communicate and what in the words that we say, how they connect. I'm going to pause for a minute because those are the 10 essential practices. Are there any questions, any comments, anything that stands out to you before we kind of move forward? Again, Christy put in the chat the link to the resource hub for the Disciplinary Literacy Task Force, and there's so many different resources, like I said, for each one of these practices that really support teachers in providing opportunities for students to engage in these particular practices. So that will be a helpful resource. All right, so when we think about these practices, and one thing, especially in secondary spaces, is usually, very siloed. We have our math team, our social studies team, but this disciplinary literacy is an opportunity to really think about interdisciplinary discussions, right? So we have these 10 practices that are the same, whether it's whatever the content area is, and even thinking beyond just the core content areas in gym or in art classes. All of these things can be applicable in those spaces, but this might be a great opportunity, like in a PLC or in a staff meeting, to really think about focusing on certain things, and then it becomes a school-wide initiative or a department initiative. But it's a great way to really think about kind of breaking up those silos and really thinking about how the content areas really work together to support students learning, right? Because when they get into the real world, they're not just going to be doing just the math, right? There's going to be other things that's going to be involved wherever their career is. They're not going to be focused on just one content area. It's a collaboration of all the things that they've learned. So in our spaces in high school and secondary spaces, really thinking about those opportunities for students to really, work together and think about how these content areas really connect. And this is a great way for teachers to really engage in those conversations to do that. Okay, so I wanted to, one of the things that I've mentioned before here is really talking about engagement and how we can use disciplinary literacy for that engagement. So there's 3 levels of engagement that we kind of focus on. And the first one is really that behavioral engagement. So that really focuses on that level of classroom participation, how are students acting, the time that they're socializing, the time that they're on task, their interaction with their peers. Then we have cognitive engagement, really thinking about, do students have ownership in what they're learning? Do they feel like they have the ability to apply the strategies that they're using to their own learning? How is that internal process going for them when they're really thinking about how invested they are into their own work? So that cognitive engagement. And then that emotional engagement, really thinking about feelings, that perception of learning, their interests and relationships that can contribute to the student's ability to learn. What other things that might be coming into play, because our students come to us with all types of situations. What are those things that kind of that play into their emotional engagement, and how can we support that as we think about being intentional, right? So with that being said, I wanted to think about, how do these practices play into the different levels of engagement? As you take a moment and kind of process the 10 practices that we talked about, are there any that you think kind of support any of these 3 different levels of engagement as you kind of look through those practices? I'll kind of give you a moment to kind of reflect on that. All right, so these are just a few examples of engagement and how the disciplinary literacy essential practices really support engagement. I'll give you a moment just kind of read through some of these. I'm not going to kind of go over all of them, but just give you a moment to kind of read through them and kind of think about how these practices definitely can support students being engaged. So I'll give you a moment to kind of read through these. All right, are there any that you read that kind of stick out to you, or that you can kind of see how that supports engagement? I see, I'm just looking at the chat. I saw Nancy put a comment in here, behavioral and project-based. And then Christy said, connecting to lived experiences will lead to emotional engagement. Yes. I see Stephanie put in here number 8. So number 8 says, our staff works closely with students to help them monitor and direct their own progress. And this one is connected to DL practice number 8, which centers on ongoing observation and assessment of students' literacy development, all content areas. Research supports the use of effective feedback, reflection, and goal setting practices. Absolutely. So again, that formative assessment is so important, that we're constantly observing and giving feedback, and whatever those formative assessment practices that you use for students will really support their level of engagement, their interest, and all those different things. So Christy mentioned number 7. Christy, would you like to expound on number 7 and why you put that in the chat?
Well, as a former secondary math teacher, I think I can really resonate with students who would say, why are we learning this? And I wish I had learned sooner how I could have addressed that in a more organic way. And so I feel like 7 addresses that, because it's the end of the STEM says, using experiential learning tasks and activities to help all students deepen their understanding of what they are learning and why they are learning it. And I think that a lot of high school teachers can resonate with that why. And so, inquiry and problem-based just really sort of makes it all much more organic and less about the teacher having to explain afterward why we're doing this thing.
Absolutely. And I think that speaks to, you know, the building in who students are, right? And bringing in like their communities and bringing in things that really resonate with them, because now, like you said, it doesn't become, oh, why do I need to know this? It's like, oh, I can use what I'm learning to really support something outside of this classroom or go beyond me passing this test, right? Um, Thank you, Christy, for lifting that. Anyone else want to comment on any of the examples that we see on the screen? All right, so the reason why, you know, I mentioned this is because we talk about the whole child. So anyone that really deals with, you know, my KIP or school improvement, the whole child is really a focus of that plan. And within that, they focus on, and you see the ones that are circled, those 5 tenets, being engaged, being supported, being challenged, and safe and healthy also apply too. But when we're thinking about that disciplinary literacy piece, and as a teacher, being again intentional about providing opportunities for students to feel challenged, to feel supported, and to feel engaged. These practices really support these ideas of really providing opportunities and spaces for students to learn in ways that will really engage them and really support their learning in effective ways. So I always want to make that connection to the school improvement plans and just really looking at the whole child. So one thing I wanted, a couple of examples, and again, I apologize, these are math examples because that's the lens that I kind of live in. But these are just some ideas and some ways that disciplinary literacy has shown up in instruction. So on the screen, you'll see some pictures of students actually presenting. So this is actually a culturally responsive mathematics in STEM showcase that I put on with Oakland and Wayne counties. So students actually had the opportunity to create their own, something that was important to them, something they wanted to be aware, bring awareness to. And they had to think about what mathematics they can use to either bring awareness to this or to create a solution for it. And they had to take this information, create this project, and they got a chance to present it at Eastern Michigan University. And not only that, they were able to engage in STEM opportunities. So this particular project is a great example of disciplinary literacy because this project, it really encompasses all of the practices, really. So students are engaging in a problem. They are reading, they're writing, they're communicating. And during this process, as the teachers work with them, there's some formative assessment that's going on. They're bringing in their community, that community piece is there because these are things that are important to students, and the topics that the students came up with were so phenomenal. And the students were so excited and so ready to present, and just, they were really proud of their work. So you talk about increase that engagement. One particular student at the end of the session, we just kind of had an open forum for students to kind of share. And one student said, you know, when I got here, math really wasn't my thing. I really didn't like math, but this is different. Now I have a different opinion now. So to be able to make a shift in a student that really didn't identify as a mathematics person to now saying, hey, I can do mathematics, because they provide the opportunity to engage in something that made sense to them, engaged in a way where mathematics was fun for them, or mathematics, they understood why they were doing it and why they were using it. So that's one way to really think about disciplinary literacy and how it can support mathematics learning. In the middle, this is a graphing story. Is anybody in here? Well, I don't know, everyone's not math people, but this is just another way to use text. So this is called a graphing story. So what it is, and I'll play just a brief moment of it, but what it is, there's small snippets, and the students have like a certain amount of time to watch the video, and they have to read it. They have to analyze this video and actually create a graph of create an image of what they think the graph will look like. So I'm going to challenge you all to think about this. And I know everyone may not be mathematics instructors in here, but really think about, as you watch this quick little snip, what do you think this graph is going to look like? So there's a pause for students and they get to redo it, make adjustments in slower motion. So when you think about something like that, what practices, and you can put it in the chat or you can unmute. If you look at those 10 practices, what practices were exhibited through this particular activity? Wide range of text, correct. Yes, this is watching the video. They have to actually, this is considered a text because they actually have to analyze this and really think about what this might look like. They have to write because they're actually writing a graph. They have to, you know, actually think about what the X and Y axis are, think about what that looks like as they plot the points on the graph. So they're writing. As an instructor, you might facilitate some conversation. So students might be talking as well. So they're reading, writing, talking within here. It's a problem. So again, it's based around this problem that they have to figure out. So there's so many different practices that are included just from them watching this small little video clip. And again, it doesn't have to be a big project. It doesn't have to be a big thing when you're really thinking about disciplinary literacy. It's really about being intentional. And the last example was really just student work. And you see a lot of writing on here. This is, again, another form of text, another opportunity for students to write within that discipline. And again, these ideas and these things are cross-discipline, across discipline. So you can things in any content area, right? So these were just some examples of ways students can read, write, and communicate. And again, I have a mathematics lens, so really thinking about it from that perspective, but we can see how this can be applicable in other content areas as well. All right, so these were just some other topics that came up from the showcase that we did last year, and we're going to be doing it again this school year. But some of the things the students came up with was just really phenomenal. I just wanted to share that as well. And also, before we wrap up, just thinking about literacy and equity and how strongly connected that they are. Just want you to read this really quick quote. Equity and justice don't happen without access to literacy. Access to the discourse communities within each discipline. This work was really grounded from the Right to Read lawsuit that was in Highland Park, and really thinking about, how are we being equitable when we think about literacies, and really providing all students with access to a wide range of text and wide range of access to how they read, write, and communicate in all content areas. So really considering that, because equity is always at the forefront of what we do here at Wayne Research. So we definitely wanted to make that connection with literacy and equity. Again, please, if you have any questions, well, before I stop, are there any questions or any comments, any things that you're wondering about in regards to the practices or disciplinary literacy in general? If not, this was just a brief overview of the disciplinary literacy practices and thinking about how it can be done in the classroom. If you would like more information, we'll put we already put the website for the disciplinary literacy in the chat. There's other opportunities that will be coming up for professional learning that go deeper into each one of the practices, what they look like, how they work together. The Disciplinary Literacy Task Force, we're working on modules. We actually have our first course that just got released this week, and I can get that information as well. I'm sure we'll get that on the website as well, to really learn about these disciplinary literacy practices and really thinking about how we can use this as a school-wide initiative to really think about how we can work as teams across disciplines to really support literacy within our school buildings. So with that, I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your participation. Again, please reach out to me if you have any questions. I know this was just a brief overview of everything. So if you want more information, want to go deeper into exploring what disciplinary literacy is, even if you're in the mathematics field and you want to know more about the showcase or more about how we can look at particular mathematics tasks and really think about going deeper into disciplinary literacy in that way, we can definitely support you all with that. So again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. And please let me know if you have any questions.